Hello everyone, my name is ashtongleckman, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Mac Quayle, who is a Emmy-winning and Grammy-nominated composer. You might know him from things like Mr. Robot, 911 on Fox, seasons 5, 6, and 7 of American Horror Story, and as well as American Crime Story. Mac, thank you so much for joining me today.
That's my pleasure. It's good to be here.
How did you get into music, and how did you actually find your passion for composing for visual media in specific?
Well, the short version is that my parents took me at age 6 and put me in the church choir, and I started singing and learning music. The choir master was like teaching us music, so I had zero. I couldn't read music. I didn't know anything about it, and after that experience, a number of years in the choir, I had a basic understanding, and then that sort of this progression from there to piano lessons to high school band and orchestra, rock bands, and then I ended up at New York University in New York City, of course, and that led to an internship in a recording studio, which turned into a career in the music business as a keyboard player, programmer, remixer, producer, and after many years doing that, the music industry started to sort of have its troubles in the early 2000s, and so I thought, oh, maybe it's time to look for something else. I moved to Los Angeles with this idea of getting into scoring, and started a sort of career number 2 as an additional composer, working for people like Michael Levine and Cliff Martinez, and then that sort of brings me up to where I am now, where I'm composing as the main composer and working on shows and films. I mean, I had always enjoyed film scores. There's something that had caught my attention, like as a kid, that I thought was an interesting use of music. So there was a pull there. I was certainly interested in it. As I mentioned in my story, it was kind of out of necessity. The music industry stuff was fading. The music business was changing, and so I was like, oh, what's next? Oh, let's look over here. Maybe film and TV would be an interesting place. So it was kind of just where's the next gig kind of a thing. But that transition. In a lot of ways, doing what I was doing as a producer and a remixer, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, I'm in a studio for long hours, as you know, writing music, producing music, using technology. Like that part of it is pretty similar. With working on songs in the music industry. You'd work on one song. It would be a 3 or 4 minute song, and you'd work on it and produce it over and over and over and over and over, and then it would be done. With film and TV, we're working on a whole film or a whole TV series, and we're writing all these numbers of pieces of music and revising them and finishing them. So the scope of the projects tends to be a bit different. There's a comparison I like to make that when I was remixing and producing the vocal performance was sort of the center of what I was working around. That I was creating music to support this song. Now in film and television, the dialogue and the story, like that sort of has taken the place of the song and the vocal performance, and so now I'm writing music to support that. So there's actually a lot of similarities, I think.
So I think there's so many composers working in TV, but I think you are so interesting because your shows have such a distinctive sound, and each one of them, you could tell that you spent a lot of time developing the sound world of each of these shows. Whether it's Feud with its like very classic orchestral sound, or with American Horror Story and it's like very sort of aleatoric, creepy vibe. So can you talk just a little bit about let's just say you're going into a new television series. How do you usually go by developing a sound throughout a series? Is it usually starting with a conversation with the director or a showrunner like Ryan Murphy? How's that usually go?
Definitely, the conversation is always the first thing, and it will be with numbers of people involved in the beginning of it. Ryan, his producers, picture editors, music editor, like everyone is sort of thinking about what is this show going to sound like. So there's all these conversations. Maybe there's a playlist of music put together that is inspirational. And then for me, I always try to set this boundary of I want to stay away from sounds I've used on other projects. Now, that can be a little difficult. And in the case of sounds that are more like orchestral sounds, yes, there are varieties of orchestral sounds, but in general, I may use the same orchestral sounds across different projects. But other sounds, other more specialized sounds, I will try to sort of quarantine. Like, this is just going to be for Mr. Robot. I'm just going to use this set of sounds for Mr. Robot. I won't take any of those and use it in Horror Story or anything else. And I'm pretty good at holding to that rule. So once I start writing music, I'm coming up with new sounds that haven't been used before. I'm informed by these conversations with the people involved in the project, and I start to write. And I'll usually have a blank template at first, and I will create or find a few sounds to get going. I'll come up with that first piece of music. Maybe there's 8 sounds in it, and that's the beginning of the template, which will grow and evolve over the course of the project.
So for something like Mr. Robot, which has been around for 3 seasons, and there's been so much musical development throughout those 3 seasons, how does the template for you sort of evolve? Did it start out with a few, and then every episode you're increasing depending on what you did the last one, or how is that evolution of your template usually?
That's pretty much how it happens. It starts with nothing, and then there's a few sounds, and then there's a few more, and then it like kind of snowballs, and keep adding sounds. And then once there's a minute to breathe, like going through and going through all the sessions and organizing the sounds, and now here's a template to start a new cue from. And since that show has been 3 seasons, the core sound has essentially remained the same. We have evolved it a little bit, but that template is now gotten large. I can't even run it on any of my systems now. It's gotten so large after 3 seasons.
Yeah. So can you talk just a little bit? I'd like to hear just a little bit about your specific relationship with Ryan Murphy, because you've collaborated with him so much, and your guys' collaborations are, like I was saying, super, super creative. There's obviously a lot of room for, being out there, being creative, and introducing new things that haven't really been done before. So how did you both first meet, and what was it that really sparked your guys' relationship and has kept you going until the present day?
Well, I worked as an additional composer for Cliff Martinez for a number of years. I worked on maybe 12 films with him. And one of the last projects was a film that Ryan Murphy directed called The Normal Heart. And so I guess through my involvement in that project, I attracted the attention of Ryan and his team. And about 6 months after it was done, I just out of the blue got a call from one of Ryan's producers, and she says to me, hey, we're going in a different direction on American Horror Story this season, and I'm wondering if you would be interested in writing a piece of music for us this afternoon. I was interested. I wrote a piece of music, and they played it for Ryan the next day, and I was hired. And that's how it began. And I think that pretty much represents the core, like that's at the heart of our relationship, is that I have been able to write music that does what he needs for his shows to help tell his stories. Um, and over these like 4 years now, um, our relationship is such that there are these conversations at the beginning of a project about the tone, the world that the project will live in, what music might define that world, and then I just go do my thing. And Ryan is probably, I don't know, one of the busiest guys working. I don't know how he does it all. So he tends to be more of like a big picture type thinker when it comes to music. He's not in there like giving me tons of notes about things. We will get the music to a point where we feel Ryan will be happy with it, and at that point, there's few notes that come back. Occasionally, it'll be like a big note, like, yes, the ending needs to be more sad, or I'm not liking that main instrument. Let's change it for something else, and that's kind of it. So it's been working now for 4 years, and I think as long as I can keep coming up with music that helps him tell his stories, we'll keep it going.
So what for you, other than the amount of music needed for a project, is the difference between composing for a long-running television series and a feature film?
I think that I think it's quite similar. I mean, it's the workflow is a little different because you're spending, maybe you might spend a couple of months working on a film, just this 1-2 hour piece of work, where the show will run longer and have more episodes and require more music. But at the heart, I see them as pretty much the same thing. I mean, you're helping these storytellers to tell their story, and it's really pretty similar.
Yeah. So just to get into a little bit of tech, because I'm super interested in sort of the softwares that you use and what synths you use and everything like that. So let's just jump into that. So first of all, which digital audio workstation are you currently working in, and what are your sort of go-to samples and digital synths currently?
My workstation is Logic Pro. Been using it for many years, and I'm quite fond of virtual instruments. I have a pretty large collection now. Some of my go-to synthesizer plugins, the Yuhi family of synths, I find are fantastic. Zebra, Diva, Repro, Hive, really great stuff. I've had a lot of great success using another family of instruments, the Rob Papin family, Predator, Blue 2. Another, he has a bunch of great stuff. Native Instruments is pretty much a staple for me. And I don't regularly use like everything that they make, but I Contact, of course, has become the industry standard sample player, and so that is where my sample library. But that's mainly what I use for samples. I mean, Logic has its own sampler, which is pretty outdated at this point. But before Contact sort of took over everything, that like the EXS24 Logic was my sampler. But now, Contact is pretty much where it's at. So I've got tons of sample libraries. Spectrasonics, another one of my favorites. I mean, they're just incredible. Omnisphere, very useful, very versatile.
Do you use a lot of like extensions for Omnisphere, like from the Unfinished and such, just like extension packs that have been created for it, or?
Don't mention the Unfinished. I don't want other people to know about the Unfinished.
It's my secret weapon. Yeah.
He's great, the Unfinished.
Oh, he is.
I do have some Unfinished for Omnisphere. I have Unfinished for Zebra, and he's my hero as a synth programmer.
Yeah.
but Omnisphere is of course their flagship synth, but Trillion is a fantastic bass instrument. Stylus RMX is a little old now, but still I find incredibly useful for putting together beats out of different components and working with loops and whatnot. And now I've been getting into Keyscape, their latest, which is also pretty fantastic. So Spectrasonics gets a lot of use, a lot of use over here.
In terms of like your desert island orchestral samples, can you just do like strings, winds, brass, traditional percussion, and epic percussion?
Yeah, I don't. I have a feeling like if I was going to be on a desert island, I probably would just have synths. and
Fair enough.
And I'm half joking, but I mean, if you look at the work that I've done, most of it has not been orchestral, with the exception of Feud.
Yeah.
So until Feud, which was just a couple of years ago, I mean, I didn't even have an orchestral template. I know that's kind of like standard stuff these days. Everybody has their big orchestral template with mixing lots of libraries, and I didn't have one because I wasn't writing orchestral music. When that project came along, it was time to put one together, and what I had, I decided just to use what I had at that point, which was the East-West. I had like the full East-West library.
Yeah.
And so we put it together, and it worked great. It's a simple template, and it ran really well on my system, and it did the trick. So I've gotten some other things since then. I mean, I like the LA scoring strings. There's something sort of nicely imperfect about those that I like. I've been using some of the Berlin stuff recently, which has been pretty good. But yeah, I think maybe check back with me in a few years, and maybe my orchestral template and library collection will have grown.
So are you also using some hardware synthesizers as well, in addition to software synths?
Mostly I'm not, and it's due to the time. It's just slower. It's slower to use them for me, and with the tight deadlines of television, I haven't found a way to really fit that into the workflow. And it's funny because people are always asking me about Mr. Robot, like what hardware synths I'm using, and I tell them I'm not using hardware synths, and they're always like really surprised, like how do you get those sounds out of the virtual instruments? And I don't know. I just tweak them till they sound right to me. Now there's one exception to my answer, which is that I worked on another show for Ryan Murphy this year called Pose, and it takes place in the sort of late 80s in New York City, and they wanted to have a very 80s sound, which we think of 80s sound scores, we think of synths. I do. So the soundtrack for that show was going to be mostly songs, like actual songs from the 80s. So there wasn't going to be a whole lot of score needed. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great opportunity to go hardware. And so I dusted off a couple of my vintage synths, and I bought a couple of new analog vintage-like synths. And my palette for that show was essentially like 6 hardware keyboards. I used a piano sample and some drums in the computer, but the rest of it was all hardware. And it was a lot of fun to just work with the hardware. It was slower, but it was fun, and it does have this depth of sound that I don't feel you really get from the plugins.
So I've always been super, super curious because TV composers are just so incredibly interesting because of the amount of music that they need to write. It's just an incredible amount. And I was curious to, when you get the cue sheet and you get episode by episode by episode, and there's all this music that needs to be written, how have you developed a certain workflow to just push through the week, get the music written? What is your workflow? And how much music do you generally write in a day?
It's not an easy answer for that question because it really varies. It really depends on the show and the week, and uh, the Ryan Murphy projects, they're very sort of non-conventional as far as the workflow for post-production. Um, what I think of as a conventional workflow would be the cut of the episode is locked or very close to locked. You have a spotting session. You pick where you want to have all the music. You discuss what the music should be. You go and write the music. You turn it in. You get revisions. Once it's ready, you mix it, and then the show is done. Like that's sort of what I consider a conventional workflow. But with Ryan Murphy, we do it differently, and I start writing music way early when the cut is they're just starting, and the editor might say, "Hey, I've got Act 1 in a rough state, and we've got some ideas for what we should do musically. I'm going to send that to you," and I will start writing, and I will write and mix and deliver stems to this rough Act 1, and then they may say, "Well, now we have the whole episode," and I'll write some more, and it's like this is kind of this constantly evolving. The music's evolving, the cut's evolving. I'm delivering them stems. They're taking the stems that I've delivered and maybe cutting them as they cut the picture. Maybe they're tracking some and putting in other spots, so other scenes are getting covered with the music that I've already written. So it's this kind of very fluid, sometimes a little chaotic process where everybody is working on this episode, and it's just constantly changing, like right up until the end. Mm-hmm. So at the same time, I may be doing that on one episode, and now the next episode they've got an act and they're sending me that one. So now I'm starting working a little bit on that episode, and so it's all sort of happening at once. It sounds a little confusing, and it is, but we've all kind of I think we've all embraced it, and it gets the job done. All of that said, there's too much music to write for just one person to be doing everything, and so I do have some help. I have a full-time assistant. I also have some other composers working as additional composers, so they're helping me to get everything across the finish line. So far we're able to deliver what they need, and people are happy.
Yeah. So obviously as a composer, you really are in a way just a storyteller. You're the same thing as the director is, as the producer is. You're there to tell a story in a sense. So when you go in and you're spotting the film, how do you, as a storyteller, from that perspective, not as a composer, how do you choose where to put the music and where not to put the music? Because in general, music has this very simple way of sentimentalizing something if you put it in the wrong section. So how do you look for areas of silence, or we're going to put music here?
Well, I mean that's like so much of the process, I find that's a collaboration as well. I'm talking with the producers or the editors about that, and it's an interesting thing. I mean, you might think right at first, oh, it makes a lot of sense to have the music start here when the character says a certain line of dialogue, because now the music is going to tell us that something is going to happen. But in discussions about it, or maybe even trying to put a piece of music there, you realize, oh, that's too early. We don't need the music there. It would be better served with silence, and we'll wait until this next turn in the scene. That's when the music will come in. And so it's this collaboration, different people throwing in ideas, trying some things, and coming up with what you think is going to be the right place for the music to come in, the right part of the story for it to be telling. And of course, these things can be changed up to the last minute. So we may all feel really good about the choices we made and the spotting and how the music is helping to tell the story. And then right at that final day of the mix, the decision is made to, you know what, maybe we don't need music here. Let's actually pull it out of the section that's not needed. Silence would do a better job. Or let's move music from here over to here, or let's swap out for a song. I mean, all these things, sort of happen, and then we end up with the final product.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I was super interested in seeing is that you did a live performance last year of your music for Mr. Robot. And I'm curious, we've seen so many of these live performances from media composers popping up around the world, and it's seemingly becoming so ingrained within, pop culture. And really, music is starting, in a way, not only living within the films and the TV shows, but they're now on the road, and people are loving the music as music. So I'm curious, what was your experience performing your music live, and what was the audience's, if you got to speak to any of the audience members, what was their reaction, and what did you sort of learn from the experience?
It was a great experience, and I had last year I did a total of 4 performances, and each one sort of grew. With the final performance was last December here in Los Angeles at the legendary Roxy rock club in Hollywood, and I had a vision for this type of performance. The music of Mr. Robot is electronic. It has beats. It's dark. It can be aggressive, and it's not something that would obviously be performed by an orchestra. Although I do have ideas for that, maybe for the future. But
I'm interested.
But the more obvious thing for me was that it would be a show that would be more akin to like a rock or EDM show. Like my fantasy is that it's kind of like the Chemical Brothers performing the music for Mr. Robot, and so I started looking at the music from the show and picking pieces that I thought would be good to perform. Started doing arrangements of them that would translate on stage, and then thought, how can I make this exciting? How can I make it something that people want to watch? That it's not just like I could go on stage with my laptop and a keyboard and perform the music and have a bunch of tracks playing, but I think that's maybe a little boring. So I wanted to have a band. I wanted to have a drummer, another keyboard player, guitar player, and so that's pretty much what the ensemble grew into in this last performance. And it was loud. It was aggressive. It was sort of more pumped up than the recorded versions. So the live drummer really helped with that. And we had a visual component, images being projected on a screen behind us, some from the show, but not all. Some were just like computer graphics and whatnot. And I was really pleased with how the performance had evolved from performance 1 to this last one at the Roxy. And given the response from the audience, they seemed to really like it as well. So I'm encouraged to do more. I'm not sure yet what the next one will be, but I think that there's definitely going to be some more in the future.
So for the final question, now more than ever, there is so many composers all around the world because of technology wanting to pursue a career in media composition. And especially in the modern day when the industries are now just growing and growing and growing, and there's so many studios and politics involved in the world. What would be one piece of advice that you would have for an aspiring media composer, just in general, on if they wanted to pursue a career in media composition?
I mean, I think that I only know like my path, and my path was to meet composers that were established and convince them to hire me, or to try hiring me to work with them as an additional composer. and that's a pretty well worn path. A lot of people have done that and are doing that, and so that's that's what I know that has worked for me. I learned a lot from the people that I did additional music for. I got some credits through that, and was able to translate that into my own career. So I think that's a great way to do things. There's other ways. Um, you meet a young director that and score their film, and then the film is successful, and everybody launches from that. Of course, one of the ways that happens too is like become a rock star first, and then you can often just step right over into film composing.
Trent Reznor, Elfman, yeah, very common, yeah.
Reznor, there's been a number of people. I mean, Danny Elfman was
Boingo.
that was kind of a rock star first.
Hans Zimmer with the Buggles.
Hans Zimmer, yeah. So, but I think that all of those things, like those are the ways of getting into the business. No matter what way you choose or have the opportunity to do, probably the most important thing is to just work on your craft. Write music, compose, produce. Producing music, I think, is a very important part of this job. When you're working in a studio and working with technology, how to make it sound good. It's one thing to write music, but it's another thing to make it sound good. And so I think that's an important skill. So to learn all that stuff, so that when that opportunity is there, whether it's another composer or a filmmaker, you can deliver. Like, that's the most important advice I can give.
Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. And I seriously cannot wait to see what you did with the rest of the season of American Horror Story Apocalypse. It's great so far.
All right. Thank you so much.